architect knowledge, beginning with Kate and Randy Whiting of the Brownstone Foundation, who've been continuous supporters of the Sustained Suppers. Thank you, Kate and Randy. And also the continued generosity of CCOF, the California Certified Organic Farmers, and Kelly Damewood. Thank you guys so much. And I want to mention our beverage donors, including Radonich, Brother Vineyards, Catherine Kennedy Winery, and Everett Family Farms, as well as Alta Organic Coffee and Tea. Thank you so much for your generosity. Two more. Give a big hand to Sandbar Solar for powering this event. We don't have electricity here on the farm. And also, really importantly, I want to recognize Ron Swenson, who has generously donated this land for the past 24 years to the Homeless Garden Project. Thank you so much, Ron. Okay, it's the mission of the Homeless Garden Project that in the soil of our urban farm and garden, people find the tools that they need to build a home in the world. We're proud to be advancing that mission here during the coming years at Poganip Farm, at our new permanent home. At Poganip, we'll be able to triple the capacity that we have now to transform the lives of homeless men and women, with the support of thousands of volunteers who volunteer every year here at the farm to help us distribute tons of fresh organic produce to those in the community who otherwise wouldn't have access to it. We're so fortunate, especially when I look out at all of you, to live in a community like Santa Cruz, where a project like the Homeless Garden Project can emerge and become at some point a model for the rest of the country. There is so much generosity in this community and such a strong belief that when we come together, we can make a difference, even when we take on really tough issues like homelessness. So it's not surprising that someone like our keynote speaker tonight, Jonathan Franzen, would choose to live at least part of the time in Santa Cruz, or that he would choose to support the Homeless Garden Project. Time magazine has called Jonathan Franzen the great American novelist, and the New York Times referred to his crackling genius. He's the author of 5 novels, including Freedom, The Corrections, and 5 works of nonfiction and translation, including The Krauss Project and Farther Away. He's made Oprah's book list and appeared on the cover of Time magazine. But he's also a bird watcher who's been spotted watching birds right here on the farm, and he's chosen to be with us here tonight. Please join me in welcoming Jonathan Franzen.
Full-time Santa Cruz. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. I am just a absolutely huge fan of the Homeless Garden Project. It embodies pretty much everything I believe about how we should treat both the people around us and the land that supports us. And we're doing it. You're doing it by being here. So thank you again for that. And now I'm a little nervous about the speech because I was given a topic, sustainability, that's a bit fraught. In order to explain why I so admire Homeless Garden Project and why we should continue to support it and be thrilled about its expansion, I'm afraid I first need to talk about unsustainability. So I'm just gonna, lower the boom and deliver this speech.
Say it like it is.
Perhaps you'll think again before you invite a literary writer to give this speech.
Go, Greta!
There is infinite hope, Kafka tells us, only not for us. This is a fittingly mystical epigram from a writer whose characters strive for ostensibly reachable goals and, tragically or amusingly, never manage to get any closer to them. But it seems to me in our rapidly darkening world that the converse of Kafka's quip is equally true. There is no hope, except for us. I'm talking, of course, about climate change. The struggle to rein in global carbon emissions and keep the planet from melting down has the feel of Kafka's fiction. The goal has been clear for 30 years or more, and despite earnest worldwide efforts, we've made essentially no progress toward reaching it. The goal keeps receding as if it were infinitely distant. If you care about the planet and about the people and the animals who live in it, there are two ways to think about this. You can keep on hoping that the goal is reachable on the theory that any hope, even a vanishingly small hope, is better than no hope, and feel ever more frustrated or enraged by the world's inaction on climate. Or you can accept that it's already too late to take action and rethink what it means to have hope. You wouldn't be alone in thinking it's too late. The science is strong and the evidence is verging on irrefutable. If you're younger than 60, you have a good chance of witnessing the radical destabilization of life on Earth. Massive crop failures, apocalyptic fires, imploding economies, epic flooding, hundreds of millions of refugees. If you're under 30, you're all but guaranteed to witness it. I confess that having accepted this, I'm saddened by the persistence of false hope. The opinion pages of the New York Times are especially redolent of Kafka. Hardly a day seems to pass without my reading that it's time to roll up our sleeves and tackle the problem of climate change, that the problem can still be solved if we summon the collective will to do it. Although this message was probably still true in 1989, when the science became fully clear, we've emitted as much atmospheric carbon in the past 30 years as we did in the previous 2 centuries of industrialization. The facts have changed, but somehow the message stays the same. To the extent that this denial is psychological, I can sympathize, despite the outrageous fact that I'll soon be dead forever. I live in the present, not the future. Given a choice between an alarming abstraction, death, and the reassuring evidence of my senses, breakfast, my mind prefers to focus on the latter. Bacon, definitely. Like once a year, but still. I would shop nowhere else. The planet, too, is still marvelously intact. I rest my case. Still basically normal. And its impending collapse is even harder to wrap my mind around than death. Other kinds of apocalypse, whether religious or thermonuclear or asteroidal, at least have the binary neatness of dying. One moment the world's there, the next moment it's gone forever. Climate apocalypse, by contrast, is messy. It will take the form of increasingly severe crises compounding chaotically until civilization begins to fray. Things will get very bad, but maybe not too soon, and maybe not for everyone, maybe not for me. Some of the denial, however, is more willful. The evil of the Republican Party's position on climate science is well known, but denial is equally well entrenched in progressive politics and environmental activism. Even if climate catastrophe can't actually be avoided, the thinking goes, it can still be postponed by slashing carbon emissions, and the only way to motivate the electorate to do this is to proceed as if the problem can be solved. Unlike the political right, the left prides itself on listening to climate scientists who do indeed allow that the problem is still theoretically solvable. But the left doesn't seem to listen very carefully. The stress falls on the word theoretically. Getting a bit technical here, but I'm just going to do it because I can. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, I'm sure you've heard of it, tells us that to have any hope of averting complete catastrophe, we not only need to reverse the trend of the past 3 decades, we need to reach zero net emissions globally in the next 3 decades. This is, to say the least, a tall order. It also assumes you trust the IPCC's numbers. New research described just this week in Scientific American, check it out, demonstrates that climate scientists, far from exaggerating the threat, have consistently underestimated its pace and severity, and the IPCC's numbers are based on those underestimates. Here's one measure of how drastic our actions need to be. According to a recent paper in Nature, the journal, the carbon emissions from existing global infrastructure, if operated through its normal lifetime, will exceed the IPCC's entire emissions allowance, the further gigatons of carbon that can be emitted without destabilizing the planet. The estimate in Nature does not include the thousands of new energy and transportation projects already planned or under construction, nor does it include carbon input from non-industrial sources, cattle farming, deforestation, release of Arctic methane, and the like. Practically speaking, to stay within the IPCC's allowance, much of the world's existing infrastructure, like what we have right now, has to be shut down within the next decade. Meanwhile, on the demand side, global energy consumption only rises. Thus far, the carbon savings provided by renewable energy have been more than offset by consumer demand. To project the coming rise in the global mean temperature, scientists rely on complicated atmospheric modeling. They take a host of variables and run them through supercomputers to generate, say, 10,000 different scenarios for the coming century in order to make a best prediction of the rise in temperature. What then gets reported in the media isn't the likeliest rise in temperature. It's the lowest temperature that shows up in 93% of all scenarios. When a scientist predicts a rise of 2 degrees Celsius, she's merely naming a number about which she's very confident. The rise will be at least 2 degrees. The likeliest rise is far higher. As a non-scientist, I do my own kind of modeling. I run various future scenarios through my brain, applying the constraints of what I know about human psychology and political reality, and I count the scenarios in which collective action prevents the global mean temperature from rising more than 2 degrees Celsius, the commonly accepted point of no return. For catastrophe to be averted, here are some necessary conditions. Every one of the world's major polluting countries must institute draconian conservation measures, shut down much of its energy and transportation infrastructure, and completely retool its economy. In each case, this will require massive government intervention, and it has to happen not only in every country, but throughout every country, making Santa Cruz, in the piece I say New York City, but let's call it Santa Cruz, a green utopia will not avail if Texans keep pumping oil and driving pickup trucks. The actions taken by these countries also have to be the right ones. Vast sums of government money must be spent without wasting it and without lining the wrong pockets. Here it's useful to recall the tragic joke of the European Union's biodiesel mandate, which served to accelerate the deforestation of Indonesia for palm oil plantations, or the American subsidy of ethanol fuel, which turned out to benefit no one but corn farmers. Citizens in every major country must accept high taxes, economic disruption, and severe curtailment of their familiar lifestyles without revolting. This includes the heavily armed, government-hating citizens of American red states. Finally, human beings in overwhelming numbers must accept the reality of climate change and have faith in the extreme measures taken to combat it. They can't dismiss news they dislike as fake. They have to set aside nationalism and class and racial resentments. They have to make sacrifices for distant, threatened nations and distant future generations. They have to be permanently terrified by hotter summers and more frequent natural disasters rather than just getting used to them. Every day, instead of thinking about breakfast, they have to think about death. Call me a pessimist. Or call me a humanist, but I don't see human nature fundamentally changing anytime soon. I can run 10,000 scenarios through my model, and in not one of them do I see the IPCC's target being met. To judge from recent opinion polls, which show that a majority of Americans, including many Republicans, are pessimistic about the planet's future, I'm not alone in having reached this conclusion. But there continues to be a taboo against broadcasting it. Believe me. Climate activists argue that if we publicly admit that the climate problem can't be solved, it will discourage people from taking any ameliorative actions at all. This seems to me not only a patronizing calculation, but an ineffectual one, given how little progress the activists have to show for it to date. The activists who make it remind me of the religious leaders who fear that without the promise of eternal salvation, people won't bother to behave well. In my experience, non-believers are no less loving of their neighbors than believers. And so I wonder what might happen if, instead of denying reality, we told ourselves the truth. First of all, even though we can no longer hope to keep global warming below 2 degrees, there's still a strong practical and ethical case for reducing carbon emissions. In the long run, it may make no difference how badly we miss the targets. Once the point of no return is passed, the catastrophe takes on a life of its own, intensified by various feedback loops, and the world will be so utterly transformed that 1 degree of temperature or more or fewer probably won't signify. In the shorter term, however, half measures are much better than no measures. Halfway hitting the IPCC's targets would make the immediate effects of warming somewhat less severe, and it would somewhat postpone the point of no return. The most terrifying thing about climate change is the speed at which it's advancing, believe me. The almost monthly shattering of temperature records, the sickening pace at which the Arctic is melting. If collective world action resulted in just one fewer devastating hurricane in 2030, just a few extra years of relative stability, it would be a goal worth pursuing. In fact, I believe it would be pursuing even if it had no effect at all. To fail to conserve a finite resource when conservation measures are available, to needlessly add carbon to the atmosphere when we know very well what carbon is doing to it, is simply wrong. Although the actions of one individual have zero effect on the climate, this doesn't mean they're meaningless. Each of us has an ethical choice to make. During the Protestant Reformation, when end times was merely an idea, not the horribly concrete thing it is today, a key doctrinal question was whether you should perform good works because it will get you into heaven, or whether you should perform them simply because they're good. Because while heaven is a question mark, you know that this world would be better if everyone performed them. I can respect the planet and care about the people with whom I share it without believing that it will save me. More than that, the false hope of salvation can be actively harmful. If you persist in believing the catastrophe can be averted by rolling up our collective sleeves, you commit yourselves to tackling a problem so immense that it needs to be everyone's overriding priority forever. One result, weirdly, is a kind of complacency. By voting for green candidates, riding a bike to work, avoiding air travel, you can feel you've done everything you can for the only thing worth doing. Whereas if you accept the reality that the planet will soon overheat to the point of threatening civilization, there's not just one thing you should be doing. There are many. I'm getting to the Homeless Garden Project. Obsessive attention to reducing carbon emissions in the hope that it will save us diverts resources and attention from preparing for the near certainty that it won't. Our resources aren't infinite. Even if we invest much of them in a longest shot gamble, it makes no sense to invest all of them. Every $1 billion spent on high-speed trains, which may or may not be suitable for North America anyway, is $1 billion not banked for disaster preparedness, reparations to inundated countries, or future humanitarian relief. Every renewable energy megaproject that destroys a living ecosystem, the green energy development now occurring in Kenya's national parks, the giant hydroelectric projects in Brazil, the construction of solar farms in open spaces rather than in settled areas, erodes the resilience of a natural world that we depend on and is already fighting for its life. Every public pronouncement that climate change is the environmental issue distracts attention from other grave threats to our welfare, like soil and water depletion, overuse of pesticides, the devastation of world fisheries. Collective will is needed for these problems too, and unlike the problem of carbon, they're within our power to solve. As a bonus, many low-tech conservation actions, restoring forests, preserving grasslands, eating less meat, can reduce our carbon footprint as effectively as massive industrial actions.
You want to reduce your carbon footprint? Don't drive. Don't drive a car.
Good point. I carpooled in a hybrid over here. Just so you know. I left my Suburban in the driveway. Joke, joke. Okay. I'm now building to the conclusion. Heedless, all-out war on climate change made sense only as long as it was winnable. Once you accept that we've lost it, other kinds of actions take on greater meaning. Preparing for fires and floods and refugees is a directly pertinent example, but the impending catastrophe heightens the urgency of almost any world-improving action. In times of increasing chaos, people seek protection in tribalism and armed force rather than in the rule of law. And our best defense against this kind of dystopia is to maintain functioning democracies, functioning legal systems, functioning communities. In this respect, any movement toward a more just and civil society can now be considered a meaningful climate action. Securing fair elections is a climate action. Combating extreme wealth inequality is a climate action. Shutting down the hate machine of social media is a climate action. Humane immigration policy, the struggles for racial and gender equality, promoting respect for laws and their enforcement, supporting a free and independent press, ridding the country of assault weapons, these are all meaningful climate actions. Getting there, getting there.
Sorry.
Look, no, Brandon's going to do some great talking about it. We've been hearing about it. And I will say something too. To survive rising temperatures, every system, whether of the natural world or of the human world, will need to be as strong and healthy as we can make it. And then there's the matter of hope. If your hope for the future depends on achieving the IPCC's targets, what will you do 10 years from now when the targets become unreachable even in theory? Give up on the planet entirely? Despair and shoot yourself? To borrow from the advice of financial planners, I might suggest a more balanced portfolio of hopes. Why do I want to say portfolio? I might suggest a more balanced portfolio of hopes, some of them longer term, most of them shorter. Climate change is the greatest issue of our time, and there's nothing wrong with doing everything you can to fight it in the crazy hope that you'll succeed, but it's just as important to fight smaller, more local battles that you have some realistic hope of winning. Keep doing the right thing for the planet, yes, but also keep trying to save what you love specifically. A community, an institution, a wild place, a species that's in trouble, and take heart in your small successes. Any good thing you do now is arguably a hedge against the hotter future, but the really meaningful thing is that it's good today. As long as you have something to love, you have something to hope for. Here in Santa Cruz, we have the Homeless Garden Project. Thanks to Ron Swenson and the support of literally thousands of people, we have this fantastic, almost dreamlike working farm that offers employment, training, support, and a sense of community to members of the city's homeless population. It's not going to solve the problem of homelessness, but it's been changing lives, one trainee at a time, for nearly 30 years. Supports itself in part by selling organic produce and contributes more broadly to a revolution in how we think about people in need, the land we depend on, and the natural world around us. In the summer, as members of its CSA, Kathy and I enjoy its kale and strawberries. And in the fall, because the soil is alive and uncontaminated, small migratory birds find sustenance in the furrows. You'll see the birders here, too. There may come a time, sooner than any of us likes to think, when the systems of industrial agriculture and global trade break down and homeless people outnumber people with homes. At that point, traditional local farming and strong communities will no longer just be liberal buzzwords. Kindness to neighbors, respect for the land, nurturing healthy soil, wisely managing water, caring for pollinators will be essential in a crisis and in whatever society survives it. Indeed, the Homeless Garden Project offers me the hope that the future, while undoubtedly worse than the present in many ways, might also, in some ways, be better. Most of all, though, it gives me hope for today. Thank you very much.
Oh, I'm inspired. Hopefully you are. Well, first I loved hearing Jonathan speak. What more do I need to say about that, right? I have to love his latest novel with all the references to New Leaf, including the crazy idea that we had a vegan butcher. I don't know if you read that, but it actually it's in there. And Brandon, wow. That's what this is all about, okay? I have a long history with the Homeless Garden Project. First through New Leaf Community Markets, and later, after I retired, as a member of the cabal raising money for the move to Poganet. There's a cabal. Major kudos to Kathy Calfo and Patrice Boyle for all the time and energy that they dedicated to leading this effort. So, as the founder of New Leaf, I know how much affection our community has for this amazing organization. As part of New Leaf's giving programs, we provide our employees with paid time to do work with local nonprofits. Hands down, the most volunteered for nonprofit is the Homeless Garden Project. There's a good reason for that. Another giving program New Leaf developed was in 1993 when we created the EnviroTokens program. I'm sure you all know about that, and where our customers vote every year to select the organizations that benefit from that program. Well, it turns out that on the first ballot, when we first launched that program, the Homeless Garden Project was not listed on the ballot. And yet, it received the most votes of any organization. That says a lot, and there's a good reason for that. Now, the good reason for that is that the Homeless Garden Project is impactful. It's empowering, not just enabling. People like Brandon, who had a rough road to travel, get the opportunity to turn their lives around, find jobs, find housing, and get to be productive members of our community. And of course, I love that they get to do this while developing skills in an organic garden. Job skills, life skills. So, I'm here to ask each and every one of you to give what you can to support this wonderful, amazing, beloved organization. Be a part of the 2 steps closer to home, those 2 steps being to build the farm which we are so close to achieving, as my buddy Kathy talked about, and to grow our impact. Yes, we need to keep feeding this thing with dough. And that's not the organic kind that can be so messy, but the green kind. So we'll also be able to serve even more people who are experiencing homelessness, provide more opportunities for community members, and grow more organic food for those in need. With your contributions, we hope you will consider making a 3-year pledge. We will triple the number of transitional employment positions we offer each year. We will grow and distribute more organic produce. In 2018, we grew more than 7,000 pounds of organic produce that was distributed to nonprofits throughout Santa Cruz County to feed 2,500 people. And note that 100% of trainee graduates in 2018 obtained stable housing and employment, and our last 3 classes of trainee graduates had job placement over 90%. I know that each and every one of you is already convinced to make as generous a contribution as is within your means, but I want to give you a little bit more incentive. As the S.H. Cowell Foundation has most generously challenged us to match the $25,000 that they're willing to give, but that requires you all to match that. Would anyone out there like to respond to this most generous challenge? Oh, I see right over there, Tom Bresnan. Thank you, Tom Bresnan. Fantastic. Thank you for your support. That's a great start for our 2 Steps Closer to Home campaign. Now, it's your opportunity to join us by making a 3-year pledge to support our programs. I'll now ask the table captains to stand and hand out pledge forms. Table captains, stand. And note that and note that the Homeless Garden Project Development Director, Paul Goldberg, Paul, raise your hand over there, is able to accept credit card donations tonight. We want to make it easy for you, and at the value-added table as well. Many thanks to everyone for coming to the supper and for the many ways you all support our work. Thank you. Thank you.